Okay, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Ryan Tappy and I work with the ALS Association in our Mid-Atlantic Territory. Thank you for joining us today for day 3 of ALS Clinical Research Week. There are a few things we want you to know before we begin. There will be time at the end of this webinar for questions. You should see on your screens an option for Q&A. You can type questions you have there at any time, and we will review them at the end of the webinar to provide answers. You can also submit your questions in our chat box feature. Again, we will review all questions at the end of today's presentation. We do have a very short survey we are asking that everyone complete after the webinar. The survey will appear in your browser once the webinar ends. These surveys help us to know your thoughts on this webinar so that we can improve in the future. For those who are joining us for the first time, ALS Clinical Research Week features a webinar every day this week at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Each webinar focuses on an aspect of ALS research. Today's webinar, we will be learning about the Access for All and ALS Consortium, also known as All ALS. Joining us today to present will be Dr. Kelly Gwathmey and Brianna Shibley-Laird. Kelly Gwathmey is an associate professor of neurology at Virginia Commonwealth University. She studied neuroscience and behavioral biology at Emory University in Atlanta. She then attended Eastern Virginia Medical School in Norfolk, Virginia. Her neurology and clinical neurophysiology training was completed at the University of Virginia. Following this, she completed a neuromuscular medicine fellowship at both Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston and Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. At the University of Virginia, she started the multidisciplinary MDA clinic, was co-director of the ALS clinic, and was the fellowship director for both the neuromuscular and clinical neurophysiology fellowships. She joined Virginia Commonwealth University in January 2019 and currently serves in the capacity of Neuromuscular Division Chair, Neuromuscular Medicine Program Director, and EMG Laboratory Director. Dr. Gwathmey sees a wide spectrum of neuromuscular patients and performs electrodiagnostic studies. Joining Dr. Gwathmey today is Brianna Shibley-Laird. Brianna is a clinical research coordinator at Virginia Commonwealth University, working with Dr. Gwathmey and their team. She studied neuroscience and psychology at SUNY Geneseo before entering a career in research. She currently serves as the primary coordinator on the All ALS Consortium at VCU. I will now hand it over to Dr. Gwathmey and Brianna, and I will hop back on for the Q&A.
Everyone, we are super excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit more about the All ALS Consortium. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start by just providing you a brief overview of the agenda of what we'll touch on in the webinar today. So Dr. Gwathmey will start in a minute here by providing some study background. Then we'll go over the clinical site overview before going into more detail about the study goals and objectives and study timeline. Then we'll discuss in more detail the different studies under the All ALS Consortium, Prevent and Assess All ALS, before going into more specifics about the study design. And we'll wrap up by providing some activation and enrollment updates and providing some information about how to get involved if that's of interest to you. So now I'll pass it over to Dr. Gwathmey.
Thank you so much, Brianna, for that wonderful introduction. And it's an honor to be here talking to everyone today. And so with the All ALS Consortium, it's really organized into two different coordinating centers. So all these different sites report up either through the West Coordinating Center or the East Coordinating Center. So at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, we report up through the East Coordinating Center, which is located at Massachusetts General Hospital, where the overall principal investigator there is James Berry. And then the Western sites report up through Barrow Neurological Institute, where the principal investigator is Dr. Bob Bowser. And so it is sort of a complicated system, if you will, but the All ALS Consortium is a very proud contributor to something called AMP ALS, which is Accelerating Medicine's Partnership. And what is this? This is a public-private partnership that aims to accelerate therapeutic and biomarker development, specifically in ALS. It's bringing together NIH, academia, different pharmaceutical companies, foundations, patient advocacy organizations, really to stimulate the identification of new targets for therapy and also collecting future and current ALS data into this knowledge portal that you see kind of at the bottom left of your screen. And so all ALS Consortium, again, we contribute data up inside AMP ALS, and you see kind of at the middle of your screen, both the Barra Neurological Institute, which oversees 19 sites on the western side, and Healy Center at Mass General, which oversees 16 sites on the right side. And then also it's important to mention that the biosamples, and we'll get into this more in a little bit, that are collected with the All ALS Consortium go through the NIH BioSyn biorepository. And then data is also shared, as already mentioned, with that AMP ALS knowledge portal. So there's a lot of exchange of different information to try to get kind of this big data approach to understanding ALS better. Next slide, Bree. So again, it's a lot of different players here. Always at the center of everything we do are the people with lived experience. And so you see kind of at the bottom of that circle, us, All ALS Consortium, led by the coordinating centers I mentioned, as well as the PI. So I'm the site PI for VCU, and then it's funded through the NIH. And then on the top right, you see AMP ALS, again, that this is supported by the Foundation for the NIH and members. And then on the left side, you see the CPR&D. So what is that? That's critical path for rare neurodegenerative diseases. This was founded in September of 2022, and it focuses on these rare neurodegenerative diseases and specifically ALS. And so again, it's this partnership between biopharmaceutical companies, as well as regulators, patient communities, and so on, to kind of get this big data approach to understand the disease better. So you see, again, lots of arrows back and forth between these various stakeholders trying to share this information so we can be more efficient and productive in understanding the disease pathophysiology. All right, next slide, Bree. And I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. So just so everyone has an idea of how large this study is, there are 35 clinical sites throughout the country who are participating in the All ALS Consortium. So regardless of where you are in the country, you can participate or refer patients to participate in the study. Virginia Commonwealth University is responsible for enrolling participants across the entire state of Virginia and the surrounding area. So what makes All ALS different? All ALS is the largest ALS natural history study to date, with a goal to enroll 6.7% of the ALS population. And one of the reasons we're able to enroll such a large number is because of the remote enrollment options. So symptomatic participants can participate in the ASSESS sub-study in a 100% remote capacity, which really sets this study apart. All ALS also collaborates with the ALS community and other natural history studies in an effort to close the gap in ALS research. And data in samples collected from All ALS will be stored in the NIH repository, which allows data to be shared with other researchers upon approval in an effort to accelerate research outcomes. So what are the goals of the All ALS Consortium? As I mentioned in the last slide, one of the goals is to accelerate research outcomes by developing a large repository of data and samples that can be shared with ALS researchers around the world. We also want to work to combine data from this study with past and other current natural history studies to fill in the gaps in the natural history of ALS. All ALS is also aiming to foster a sense of community within the ALS community and has a goal to be accessible to all ALS patients. In terms of enrollment objectives, All ALS is aiming to enroll over 2,000 participants across those 35 clinical sites quite quickly. And in regards to this large population, All ALS wants to ensure that they're enrolling an inclusive population in regards to geography, race, socioeconomic status, and education level. Another objective is to reduce barriers to participation, and one way that that's done is by enrolling from multiple locations with those 35 clinical sites, and with that remote enrollment option as well allows for anyone to be able to participate within the All ALS Consortium. Another objective, again, is to coordinate with other ongoing studies to close that gap in research and foster a sense of community with our outreach efforts. So this is kind of what the timeline for the All ALS Consortium looks like. Speaking to Virginia Commonwealth University, we have been approved and are actively enrolling participants within the consortium. We've enrolled 5 participants to date with lots more on the schedule, and we're hoping to keep enrolling at a rapid pace. And I'm going to pass this back to Dr. Rothman to cover this slide.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to take this one because it's really important to emphasize that this study is connecting with existing ALS studies. They're working synergistically. So at VCU, we have been a site for the Natural History Consortium going back to 2017. So we have about 300 different participants already enrolled in that study. And so moving forward at VCU, we will continue to support that FDA-funded study, but we can also in parallel support All ALS Consortium by enrolling controls, remote symptomatic patients, as well as potential subjects into prevent ALS, which we'll get to in just a little bit. So I just wanted to emphasize that there's a lot of beautiful synergy here. And so also you might be aware, some of you out there listening to us right now might be at a target ALS site. So they are also invited to participate in the All ALS Consortium, and there's working synergy there. And so the samples are going into banks that are shared. All FTD, also frontotemporal dementia, right? So we're also aligning efforts from the prevent portion of All ALS Consortium with all FTD. And then would be remiss if I didn't state the CDC National ALS Registry. So data is going to be shared from All ALS with the CDC National ALS Registry as well. So again, big data approach, lots of synergies, a lot of collaborations, a very exciting project. Let's turn it back over to Bree.
Thank you. Okay, so now we've kind of gone into a lot of detail about the background of the consortium. So as I briefly mentioned earlier, there are 2 studies within the All ALS Consortium. We have All ALS Prevent and Assess All ALS. So Prevent focuses on understanding the earliest stages of ALS by enrolling people who are genetically at risk but not yet symptomatic. And we'll get into a bit more regarding the inclusion criteria for that in the next couple slides. Assess focuses on collecting data on those currently living with ALS to track disease progression and potentially identify biomarkers. This is the study that we also enroll a control cohort for, and the control population typically consists of family members and caregivers of those actively living with ALS. To go into a little bit more detail about Prevent, as I mentioned, the goal with Prevent is to characterize asymptomatic ALS disease states by obtaining natural history data and performing longitudinal follow-ups in people genetically at risk for ALS. And we define genetically at risk as people who have a first-degree relative who is a known carrier of an ALS causative gene. Or if no genetic history has been performed, we can also enroll people with a significant family history of ALS. And that for this study is defined as having 2 or more family members, first degree relatives with ALS or FTD, and at least one has to be ALS. Prevent also offers ALS gene testing with appropriate pre and post genetic counseling. Assess ALS, as I mentioned before, enrolls both symptomatic ALS individuals and the control population. with a goal to determine differences in outcome measures within these populations. Another big goal of ASSESS is to utilize the ALS FRSR and assess this survey with survival. This slide provides a little bit more cohesive picture of who can participate within the consortium. So as I mentioned, those genetically at-risk individuals can participate in our PREVENT study. These individuals are asymptomatic and are either a known carrier of a genetic mutation or have a first-degree relative who's a known carrier or has a strong family history of ALS. Then we have our symptomatic cohort that comes in person to clinic, whether that be Virginia Commonwealth University or another one of the 35 clinical sites. These again are people diagnosed with ALS. And then we also have our symptomatic remote population who can participate and assess from a completely remote standpoint. We utilize a remote phlebotomy service, a home phlebotomy service that will come to the participant's home to collect biospecimens when necessary. And then we have our control population for ASSESS as well. The control population is done in clinic. That is not done remotely. So how will participants' data be stored? All data is de-identified of PHI, and only their unique subject identifier will be used to identify their information and biofluid samples as well as clinical data. Biofluids are stored in a central biorepository, and clinical data will be stored in Neurobank, as well as the study's electronic data capture system and ALS portal. Again, this data will be shared with other researchers upon request and approval. Okay, so this slide goes into a little bit more detail regarding study design. So for ASSESS, symptomatic participants will have study visits every 4 months, either remotely or in clinic, depending on the cohort they were enrolled under. And controls will only have to come into clinic once a year, which kind of nice. It's not too intensive. At these visits, biosamples will be collected via blood draw, and participants will engage in speech assessments as well as other clinical outcome measures such as slow vital capacity and various cognitive assessments. All cohorts will also participate in monthly speech measures and patient-reported outcomes. These are done from the participant's smartphone or computer from the comfort of their own home as well, so they don't have to come into clinic to complete these items every month. And then this slide goes into a bit more detail about participant cohorts. Of note, with the PREVENT participants, it is a combination of both in-person and remote visits. So participants will have to present annually in clinic, but the rest of their visits can be done completely remotely, again, utilizing the home phlebotomy team. Just to give you another brief idea of where we are nationally in the study, so far 80% of the sites have IRB approval and 51 sites have been activated. Again, Virginia Commonwealth University is approved and activated and actively enrolling. In terms of how many participants have been enrolled so far, as of January 24th, 68 participants have been enrolled in the ASSESS symptomatic on-site, 12 symptomatic off-site, which is the remote cohort, and 28 controls have been enrolled. For PREVENT, 78 participants have been enrolled in the main study, and 10 of those participants have opted into the genetic testing results sub-study. So this is actually a good point to mention. For PREVENT, the participants either opt in or opt out of knowing the genetic results. They do not have to know the results of their genetic testing. And if they do want to know the results, they meet with a genetic counselor for that appropriate pre and post testing counseling. Okay, so this slide goes into some of the study innovations for all ALS. One thing this consortium is working to do is create a speech bank that can share speech recordings with different researchers for future research, which is super cool. We're also utilizing a e-consent platform for our remote cohort. And this makes things a lot easier for both the researchers and for the participants as well. As I've mentioned a couple times throughout this presentation, a big thing this consortium is doing is creating a very large biorepository to make samples available across the ALS research community. There's also been an ALS website created that I'll share here in the next couple slides. This website includes an embedded enrollment link in an effort to simplify accessing interest forms. So if you are interested in participating or know someone or want to refer a patient to participate, the website's super easy to navigate and has an interest form embedded in that they can just submit their information to, and they will be linked up to the site closest to them, which is super cool. As I briefly mentioned before, we're also utilizing a home phlebotomy team to support fully remote participation, which really allows or removes the barrier of transportation from research participation, which is really cool. All ALS is also using digital patient-reported outcome surveys, so patients can complete these surveys from anywhere on their smartphones, and they'll be linked directly to the study database, so they don't have to come in clinic to complete these. And as we've mentioned a couple times, All ALS is working with numerous other natural history studies in an effort to bridge that research gap. All right, so as I just mentioned, we do have a study website, which is linked here, that has that participant interest form embedded in via REDCap. And this is just an example of what the interest form looks like. Super easy to fill out. And then again, you will be referred directly to the site that's closest to you. And then a coordinator would reach out and kind of go from there. So what would a participant be asked to do if they were interested in joining the study? First step, as with any study, we would go through our informed consent document, whether that's done remotely or in person at the clinic, answer any questions the participant has before signing that document. And then I've already briefly touched on what visits would look like. It would be a combination of questionnaires, surveys, cognitive assessments, slow vital capacity, blood collection. There is also an optional CSF collection for both prevent and assess. Again, this portion is optional. You do not have to do it to participate. And CSF collection is not an option for the remote cohort either. So how can you get involved if you are interested in helping out with the All ALS Consortium? Obviously, the first one, join the study if you qualify. But really, the biggest one is to talk about it. If you have patients that might be a good fit or might be interested, send them to the website, share it with friends, advocacy groups, really just spread the word about the consortium. I'm gonna actually skip past this slide. And then we'll end it on this slide. So again, this again gives the link to the website as well as a QR code. On the bottom, in regards to the email directory, that first email, if you are not in the Virginia region, this is a good resource to reach out to. If you're interested in the study, but not in our region, they can connect you with a site that's closest to you. And then the next email underneath that is my email if you are in the region and are interested or have a patient that might be interested or know someone that might be interested. You can reach out directly to that email and I'd be happy to help you from there. And that is all I have. So I think I'll turn it back over, unless Dr. Grothman, you have something else.
No, I don't. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you both for that great presentation and all the information. I'd like to open the webinar up now for a Q&A. If you have questions and haven't already submitted them, please feel free to submit using the chat feature or the Q&A feature. We're going to do our best to answer questions. We have a lot of time here, so we should be able to get through most of them. And a few of you have already submitted, which is great. So a couple I'd like to start with. Is the study strictly for individuals with genetic ALS, or can individuals with sporadic ALS participate?
Yeah, great question. So the PREVENT study is where we are enrolling genetically at-risk individuals, but ASSESS ALS, which is a study that we're enrolling symptomatic individuals, there does not have to be a genetic component involved. You just have to have a diagnosis of ALS.
Great, great. Can individuals participate in all ALS if they are already enrolled in another clinical trial?
I can take that one. Definitely. So we anticipate that a lot of our participants will be in an interventional drug trial, perhaps as well as in all ALS. And the best thing about all ALS is really everyone qualifies. So often as a provider and a clinician, we're saddened by the fact that we can't put all of our patients into drug trials because of various inclusion exclusion criteria. But this is really an opportunity where everyone can participate and contribute. So highly encourage you to do so.
Great. The next question, kind of going off of that, if I am already enrolled in a clinical trial, is all ALS receiving that information, or do I still need to enroll in the all ALS program?
I mean, I can take that. So, I mean, and we would not know that, like, as a site principal investigator for All ALS Consortium, if you are not known to me, or, I would not know that you're already enrolled in a clinical trial, investigational drug trial. Um, Bree could probably correct me if I'm wrong. We would make a notation of it, though, when you're screened, when we see you for the first visit, that you are participating in a clinical trial, might be getting an investigational drug product. But we would not know that ahead of time, especially before you engage with us or any of the other sites.
Perfect. Does all ALS, do you coordinate with the ALS clinics at all?
In terms of ALS clinics, I'm assuming just sort of multidisciplinary clinics across the country, is the question. So, right. So I can tell you what we're doing in our region. And so we have a very nice close-knit network of the Virginia ALS clinics. And so Bree and I, as soon as we were selected to be a site and we had everything sort of open and enrolling, we reached out to the center directors at the other regional ALS centers and made them aware of this opportunity for their patients. And so, yes, we are trying to spread the word regionally. And then by doing this webinar, we're hoping to reach people outside of just Virginia too, to make them aware of this amazing opportunity. So.
Okay. Another question that came through, can an individual with the diagnosis of PLS also participate in this study?
Bree, do you want to take that or do you want me to?
That, unfortunately, not. You have to have a diagnosis of ALS. And Dr. Gwadney, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe with the PLS, they wouldn't be able to act as a control either.
Oh, right, correct. That's correct. You can act as a control. So I think it also is sort of site specific in a way in terms of what opportunities are available to you if you're a PLS patient. And I say that because, as I mentioned, we are part of the ALS Natural History Consortium separately from All ALS. And with that study, we absolutely enroll PLS patients. So, just ask your closest center director kind of what opportunities are available for you if you have PLS.
Perfect. And then just a couple questions just asking about how to participate, how to enroll. So could you just review again the process for enrolling in the study, or where individuals can go to see where it's being offered near them maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the easiest and the quickest way to do it is to go to the All ALS website. The website has a great graphic of all the 35 clinical sites. But if you don't, even if you don't want to figure out where the closest site is to you, if you just fill out the interest form, you will automatically be matched with the closest site to you. Your information will be sent to the closest site to you, and then someone will reach out to you to get you enrolled if you're a good match, which again, almost everyone can enroll in this study. So
Right. And I am hoping just to add, once this webinar series wraps up, I'm hoping to be able to send those in attendance some resources and links and ways you can get connected with the various studies and topics that we discussed this week. Okay, moving on to the next question. How will the data repository you collect lead to better treatments for ALS? I'm not sure if you're able to answer that.
Well, right, to some extent remains to be seen, but the goal, right, is to understand the pathophysiology of the disease better as well as the natural history of it. And the way we're doing that is by, as Bree mentioned, collecting different biosamples, looking at biomarkers that could kind of tip us off in terms of, this certain biomarker could be used for prognostication or predicting kind of rate of, decline. Could it potentially be used as a diagnostic biomarker down the road? That sort of thing. And so, are some of these biomarkers or signals that we're seeing in blood and spinal fluid in some situations, helpful to open up the door to our understanding of the underlying causes of ALS, which then in turn could lead to more successful therapeutic development, right? With better understanding of the disease, we're going to be hopefully more successful down the road finding drugs that work. And so it's a very big question. I mean, I think we're just in like data collection mode right now. But the very nice thing about this, as mentioned previously, is that these data repositories are going to be open to researchers, outside of the All ALS Consortium as well, because it's really going to be supported by NIH and these other entities, AMP ALS, et cetera, that allow, for others to access it, which is so important.
Great. Um, kind of going off of that, and again, I'm not sure if you're able to answer this necessarily, but could this project with the control group and the non-symptomatic control group, could it eventually reduce the need for a placebo group in other studies? And is that a goal of it?
I think that could be an indirect goal. I can't certainly speak for the entire consortium and the funding agency that's supporting it, but I mean, I think it's a really good question. I mean, it's not an immediate goal to like come up with sort of a natural history cohort that will serve in place of a placebo arm moving forward, but it's definitely an interesting question and a topic just generally we're talking about as a field. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. A more practical question, how long does the study run for?
can't believe I didn't touch on that. So sorry about that. So it depends on the study you're in. Prevent is three. No, they're both 3 years. Never mind. Yeah, 3 years.
I think too, it remains to be seen if the funding's extended, right? So like for now, we have 3 years of funding, and so hopefully it continues.
Great. Um, Going back to the control group, this question says, you mentioned that the control group is typically a family or member or a spouse. I worry we are asking so much of them already. Is there a reason the control group cannot participate remotely, or are they able to participate remotely?
Unfortunately, as of right now, the control group cannot participate remotely. I'm not entirely sure why. That's kind of just how the design was set up. I know that at VCU, we really work to reduce that kind of burden by allowing the controls to do their study visit when they're partner or family member is already in clinic for a visit. So that way they only have to come into clinic once and don't have to make that extra trip, because we do definitely recognize how burdensome that can be, and we want to reduce that as much as possible.
And I
Okay.
think a quick follow-up clarifying question for you, Bree, is if a friend, for example, wanted to be a control in all ALS consortium, even though they're not a direct caregiver or family member, would they be able to do so?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyone can be a control. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. Um, one asking to clarify, you mentioned the communication between the National Registry, Target ALS, and All ALS. It says they've donated biospecimens to the CDC biorepository. Does All ALS have access to that information, or would that person also have to enroll with the All ALS study?
So I'm sorry, Ryan, specifically what are they already enrolled in?
They are already donating to the CDC National Registry
Oh,
biorepository.
oh yes. Then you could certainly enroll in this as well. Yeah. If
Okay,
you're
great.
right, yeah, we hope everyone signs up for the CDC National Registry, and then separately could do this as well. But it gets a little bit, it's a little bit different if you're a target site versus an ALS Natural History Consortium site, because there those studies have a lot of redundancies, and so we certainly don't want to kind of duplicate efforts with the same participant, and so that's why there's a lot of information sharing if you're already a target site or a Natural History Consortium site.
And just to clarify, so you wouldn't necessarily have access to the data from the biorepository at the national. So if they're donating to the registry, you wouldn't necessarily be able to access that. They would have to enroll in all ALS as well.
You mean specifically the questionnaire portion of the CDC National Registry? Like
The the
those
bio
survey questions or the
the
biorepository, how
biorepository.
those are being harmonized
Yeah.
between the CDC and the NIH BioSend? Yeah, I believe they're separate and
Okay.
independent.
Thank you.
And then just like the questionnaires that are being used in all ALS are separate from the surveys that are completed within the National Registry.
Perfect. Um, this is asking, we just have a few more questions here. This is asking, will ALS patient information be linked to the NIH All of Us study database? I don't know if you're familiar with that.
And I believe that's not an ALS specific study, and
Okay.
so how the NIH on their end might find overlap there. I'm unfortunately not involved in that, so I'm not sure, but I'm not aware that there will be definitely synergies between those two.
Absolutely.
Possibly, yeah.
We just have somebody asking if you could go back to the slide that shows which universities and hospitals are involved, Brianna.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There we go.
And while that is up, I know you had mentioned some exclusion criteria. Would you be able to review that as well?
Yeah. Does it mention for which?
It just says what is the exclusion criteria. It doesn't specify for which study.
Sure. So, in regards to, I mean, I guess we'll start with prevent. Um, I mean, really all of them. The ex
So you can't, I mean, for example, to participate in prevent, you can't have like significant psychiatric illness that might
Mhm.
impact your ability to participate, or like a significant medical problem that would prevent your ability to participate in the study related activities, right? So when we go through that, it's like, do you have active cancer that's going to potentially influence how you participate, that sort of thing. Um, and then, this came up specifically to prevent with one of our potential participants who was a, immediate family member of a patient with genetic ALS, who had C9, who has C9 or 72 ALS. And so she had on her own been tested, had genetic testing, and found out that she did not carry the gene. And so she was excluded. She could not participate and prevent for that reason, as an example of an exclusion. Um, and then Bree, from an assess uh, standpoint, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for assess, if you're a symptomatic individual, really as long as you have access to a smartphone or computer or tablet, something, and you have a ALS diagnosis, you're able to participate. And then for the control population, very similar to prevent, you just can't have any significant psychiatric illness or significant illness that would prevent you from being able to complete your study follow-ups.
And I think it's just worth mentioning, even though I'm sure everyone kind of gathered this, that the need for the smartphone or tablet or computer is so that you can complete some of the speech assessments and then also complete some of the patient reported outcome measures.
Okay. Just a few more questions here that I'm seeing. One is a quick one. Could you clarify what you mean by natural history study?
Sure. So there is a natural history study that has received funding from the FDA over the last several years. Prior to that, it was sort of self-funded in a way. And so it is 10 different, mostly US-based sites across the country. We do have a website for that. I can send it to you, Ryan, if anyone's interested in looking at that as a resource kind of after this, if you're
I
emailing
see it.
the analyst. Um, but it is a separate natural history study that has been
Okay.
ongoing for, gosh, probably about a decade now. And so we have many thousands of patients worth of data in that study. And that is a separate but complementary study to all ALS Consortium.
Okay. So if you're participating in a study that requires you to be on site, how often are you asked to go in and provide uh, data?
Absolutely. So for prevent, which is the genetic study, that you would need to come into clinic once a year. The rest of the follow-ups are done remotely. And for assess, if you're a symptomatic participant who's coming in on site, you would come in every 4 months. If you're a control, that is again every year, just once a year.
And so I guess I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, Bree. If you are an assess and you're coming in every 4 months, would you say that those study visits could be harmonized with the regular clinical visits to lessen the travel burden for participants?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, that can and is being coordinated.
Okay. And I know you just did discuss exclusion criteria, but we did have a question come across that was specific for the assess study. Is having a trach a exclusion criteria for the assess or access study?
No, no,
Okay.
it's something that we would note, but nothing that would exclude you.
Okay. And I'm just making sure I didn't miss any. I think we have answered most of the questions that are coming across. So what I'll do is I'll wrap up the webinar here. But if you still have questions that you have, you can email me and I will try to get you an answer. But I do just want to thank Dr. Gwathmey and Brianna for the wonderful information about the All ALS Consortium. We hope those in attendance today found the information helpful. You can join us again tomorrow at 3 p.m. for the fourth webinar of the week. That webinar will be discussing the CDC ALS National Registry and the ALS Focus Survey Program, which is research you can participate in from your home. A final reminder that a survey should pop up on your browser when we end the webinar. Please don't forget to complete that survey if you're able. So we, again, just want to thank our presenters. We want to thank everybody in attendance. We hope you have a good rest of your day, and we hope to see you tomorrow.